Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here with another Master Duel video for you. So the time is upon us. The tears are here's. So we're going to be covering our Ishizu Tearlaments deck profile. At the time I'm recording this, the pack has just dropped 3 hours ago. And I have been spending that time, well, of course, recording that pack opening video, and editing it, and uploading it, and Patreon videos. But beyond all that, I've also managed to get in a handful of games with this deck. And I gotta say, I definitely can immediately tell that the skill ceiling of this deck is stupidly high, especially in the mirror match. This is definitely going to be, the mirror match in particular is definitely going to be the most skill-intensive games I've ever played here on the channel. So I'm definitely going to be covering this deck quite a bit because there are so many different things to talk about when it comes to playing this deck, and especially the mirror match. And it's not even like, you know, this deck doesn't really have like combo guides or matchup guides or anything like that. It's all so situationally dependent. But that's what's really cool about this deck. I immediately see the appeal, honestly. I am immediately having fun with this deck. So I am super eager to go ahead and start getting into it. But before we take a look at those games, we of course have to talk about the deck here itself. So this is the list that I kind of put together, and funnily enough, it actually ended up being very close. I think only 2 cards, or maybe even 1 card difference between the example list that won the Master Duel Meta Discord. So that was pretty cool to kind of learn that, hey, you know, this list that I theory crafted was actually, you know, good enough to be, again, close to an example list. So here it is right here. We have, of course, the 1 orange Herald of Orangeite. We'd be running 3 of these if we could, but the card is at 1, for good reason. We are still playing 3 Maxx. Definitely need to get that in, although, as you can see, we're not really running any other, you know, parts of the quote-unquote Maxx package, or some people call it the Master Duel attacks. Really a bunch of staple cards is what I mean, like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, Called by the Grave, and I usually like to play Crossout Designator into Biru. None of those are present in this deck. I'm not playing any of those cards in Tearlaments. The only real staples that we usually see here are going to be the 3 Maxx, as well as 3 Infinite Impermanence. So why these cards? Maxx, you probably don't need to actually ask that question. Maxx is an extremely good card. It's actually still not bad against Tearlaments. However, the thing is, Tearlaments can kind of just stop under Maxx and then be totally fine. This deck can actually play very much on your opponent's turn as well as yours, and you can set up a board state where you have multiple negates and or abilities to play during your opponent's turn, while only giving them like 1 draw off of Maxx, which is kind of ridiculous. But yeah, Maxx is still effective in this meta, but against Tearlaments, it's really mostly just going to stop their turn, but it won't necessarily stop them from having plays, if that makes any sense. As far as Infinite Impermanence, the reason we're playing Imperm here is actually against Kitkallos. This won't be the case all the time, but there's a decent amount of the time where if you just negate Kitkallos with Imperm, they're not going to be able to really do anything. Like, that's going to be the end of the Tearlaments turn. They have to have a less, you know, a lower than average hand as far as like hand quality goes in order for that to be the case, but still that is often the case. So Imperm, you might think Ash Blossom would be good here because a lot of our cards mill, but they're actually not. Ash Blossom doesn't really do a whole lot to actually stop the deck from playing. Like, yes, it can stop one of the mills, but beyond that, you know, it's really just 1 negation, and this deck has like many effects during the turn. So I like Imperm to shut down the whole Kitkallos. They don't get the Surge, they also don't get to sack this to summon and then mill 5 if you do it that way. So yeah, Maxx and Imperm are really the only staples that we have going here. We're playing 1 Diviner of the Herald, just single copy of it. I actually thought about playing 2 to maybe mill this card a little more often. You don't actually want to play 3 though, because you don't want to be normal summoning this card. Normal summon Diviner is really not that great of a play. For reasons we'll talk about more during gameplay, you have to be really selective of when you actually want to mill with Agido and Kelbek, and blind turn 1, like when it's so likely to be the mirror match, is not a good play to just normal summon Diviner and then send Agido to try to mill 5. We are, of course, playing 2 of each of the Fusers, as many copies as the game will allow us, as well as 3 Reinoheart. Were all of these cards at 3, we'd probably only need 2 Reinoheart, but they're at 2, so we play 3 Reinoheart. Same with the AA-ZEUS, we're maxing out on all the copies the game allows us, including 3 Mudora. Some AA-ZEUS decks in the past I've not played 3 Mudora, but this one you absolutely want to, because you want to be hitting this in the graveyard as often as possible. We're also playing a single copy of Fairy Tale Snow. I know I said initially that this card wasn't needed in this deck, and it's definitely not required, but at the same time, it's been pretty useful so far, so I definitely have not minded it in my testing. It's really nice to be able to make your rank 4s a lot more easily, and that's really the main purpose of it, honestly. Of course, sometimes it's good as disruption, but flipping fusion monsters, or flipping monsters face down doesn't actually stop them from being used as material as a fusion summon, so in that regard, the disruption isn't quite as good as it normally is, but it's still fine, I think, overall. Terraforming to, of course, search out the Primeval Plant Perlerino. I'm not gonna remember that pronunciation. It's Fusion. This card is definitely good for summoning the Kitkallos, which is one of the best targets for instant fusion ever. I think only Norden really surpasses it. We're playing 1 copy of Foolish Burial Goods. So this card's purpose is to send Tearlaments Sulliek, which when sent to the graveyard by card effect allows us to search a Tearlaments monster from deck to hand. So this card is effectively Rhoda by sending Sulliek. We only need the 1 single copy. Now, you might be wondering, well, Hex, why wouldn't you just play regular Foolish Burial? I mean, you want these cards to hit the graveyard, right? So why wouldn't you play it? The thing about Foolish Burial, it's actually not that great in this deck at all. Foolish Burial is kind of a -1 because we already have the ability to mill multiple cards with so many different cards in our deck, and when you think about it this way, right? When you activate Foolish Burial, what are you actually trying to send off of it? Like, Foolishing a Kelbek or an Agido is, like, pretty much never good. It would be very highly situationally dependent for that to be good. You would have to be in a situation where you need mills to get your plays, but you're foolish, your 1 of random Foolish Burial is the only card you have in your hand to do that. It also kind of requires you knowing you're not playing against the mirror match or something that's going to get helped by milling your opponent as well. And in that regard, it's just so niche. And then as far as foolishing a Tearlaments monster, like, you still need to have another monster to fuse with. That's kind of my main point here, is that Foolish Burial is, like, never good by itself in this deck. And if you already have, like, the ability to combo off with multiple cards, like, you can do better stuff than you would be able to do with Foolish Burial. So, it's a card that reads really well on paper in this deck, but in practice during my testing, I just was not impressed with it at all. So, I'm only playing 1 copy of Foolish Burial Goods to send Sulliek. If we end up already, like, milling Sulliek, we can just send a Scream to add a Cryme, and just search that up as well. Now, as far as the Rainbow Bridge of Salvation package, because I'm sure some people are going to ask about this, given that I brought up Foolish Burial Goods. Some people are playing Rainbow Bridge of Salvation. The idea here is that if you mill this or send it with Foolish Burial Goods, it allows you to search the Primeval planets Perlerino. You would then also play a single copy of the Crystal Beast Emerald Tortoise, because that is an Aqua monster. And you have to search a Crystal Beast as well as a field spell with the Rainbow Bridge of Salvation. I really don't like the idea of this package at all. I think it's bad, honestly. The few reasons I don't like it. Well, honestly, the main reason that I don't like it is that, like, you're adding bricks to your deck in order to sometimes get your field spell more often. Now, to be fair, the field spell is probably one of the more busted cards in this deck, and it's absolutely worth searching. That's, of course, why we're playing the 1 of Terraforming, even though we only have 1 field spell. But I don't think it's worth going so far out of your ways to include, like, multiple copies of this, and a Crystal Beast Emerald Tortoise, and, like, another copy of Foolish Burial Goods. That's so much main deck space. And again, we're just adding bricks in a deck that didn't have any before. On top of that, the engine is so fragile, right? And we're milling so much. If we mill the field spell or the Emerald Tortoise, then this is just dead for the rest of the game, because you have to search both from your deck to your hand. It also makes, you know, further copies of the Salvation dead as well. Also, if you're already, like, getting mills off, then you're very likely already getting plays, and you don't necessarily need the planet. Again, the planet's really, really good to have, but if you're already milling, you don't need it. So, like, I don't know. I'm just not a fan of the Rainbow Bridge of Salvation package. I think it's pretty bad. Honestly, I think it's just bad. I could be proven wrong, and I'm more than willing to say that I'm wrong if this does end up being the optimal package, but I personally have a very hard time seeing that being the case. And let's see here. So there's Foolish Burial Goods. We're on 3 Scream. You only really need 2. You can honestly get away with 1. 1 is pretty bad, though. I think you need at least 2. But I like 3. I think 3 is really good. You always want to activate this card. This card's also really good to mill to add Tearlaments Cryme. Tearlaments Cryme, by the way, exceptionally powerful card. Holy moly is this card good. Being able to negate anything at counter trap speed and shuffle it back, and then also send a monster from your hand to the graveyard is insane. I think this card is stupid good, and I know I said in the deck kind of primer that, you know, you don't always play this card, and it's true that I saw lists that aren't playing this card. I can't think of a reason really not to, though. This card is absolutely insane. Insane. I was gonna say insanity and insane. And then 2 Sulliek. I'm playing 2 to send 1 off Foolish Burial Goods and or mill this card a little bit more often. You definitely only need 1, but I would play at least 1 copy of this. And then for some of my tech slots, I decided to include Triple Tactics talent. With the Tearlaments having the ability to play during the opponent's turn so frequently, I highly anticipate that this card will be activated very, 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 very often. Some other techs you could include, Forbidden Droplet. I almost played Droplet over talent, and I might still end up testing Droplet as a board breaker. You could play Super Poly, but I'm not a big fan of it. It's not, like, terrible, but there are definitely better tech cards to play. I think Droplet, in my personal opinion, is just 100% better than the Super Poly, because the way I see Super Poly, right, is that Super Poly is like a very situational board breaker. It's really only good against the mirror match and or if your opponent has the requirements to make Mud Dragon. Whereas Droplet is just a universally good board breaker, so that's just my kind of 2 cents there. Plus, even in the mirror match, like, there's a lot of the time your opponent actually won't have 2 monsters to fuse. Like, Tearlaments can generate an insane amount of advantage, but there's a lot of the time where it only plays like 1 monster on the board at a time, especially if you're playing during the opponent's turn. So Super Poly, I think is mid. Also, we don't have Garura in Master Duel, which is a really good target to fuse for. So for those reasons, I'm not a big fan of Super Polymerization. I would say Talent or Droplet would be better. I'm currently trying Talent, and I've been liking it quite a bit so far. Alright, now for the extra deck, Elder Entity and Atis. We're running a copy because we have Diviner, but it's definitely not needed. I was playing Mud Dragon over this, but Mud Dragon never really came up, so I decided to run Atis instead. We're of course playing Kitkallos, Dragostapelia, Rulkallos, Kaliedo-Heart. A lot of these are pretty standard. A lot of the Link monsters actually aren't. Sprite Elf is really the only one that's needed. You could make an argument that the Dark Charmer is as well, though. I'm playing Aussa to steal my opponent's shufflers, or at the very least force them to activate their shufflers' effects. I think Aussa can be very good in that regard. IP and Avermax. The IP Avermax package is here just in case we need to go into that. This deck, it can actually be very hard for this deck to out an IP Avermax sometimes, so not only is that good to have, but also Avermax is an out to Avermax. Your opponent's Avermax is if you battle with it on your turn. So kind of acts as both an out to Avermax and then, of course, the threat of Avermax itself in one. And then Dark the Dark Charmer Gloomy is actually pretty good for stealing our opponent's IP Masquerenas out of their yard and then being able to just kind of do shenanigans with them. You can't do the Mechanite Crusade to Avermax because that wasn't fused in the extra deck, but we can still make like a Sprite Elf or something. Notably, if you're playing Underworld Goddess, you can use Dark to steal your opponent's IP and then make Underworld Goddess. Might end up being the right call a little bit later in the meta, but I decided to just try Avermax for now. Alright, so, holy moly, this is definitely the most I've talked about a deck before gameplay, but there was a lot to talk about here. So, let's go ahead and break the list down card by card, as we always do, and then we'll look at some games. We're playing 1 Herald of Orange Light, 3 Maxx, 1 Diviner of the Herald, 2 Tearlaments Merrli, 2 Tearlaments Havnis, 1 Fairy Tale Snow, 2 Tearlaments Scheiren, 3 Tearlaments Reinoheart, 2 Keldo the Sacred Protector, 3 Mudora the Sword Oracle, 2 Kelbek the Ancient Vanguard, 2 Agido the Ancient Sentinel, 1 Terraforming, 1 Instant Fusion, 1 Foolish Burial Goods, 3 Triple Tactics Talent, 1 Primeval Planet Perlerino, never gonna say that right, 3 Tearlaments Scream, 3 Infinite Impermanence, 1 Tearlaments Cryme, and then 2 Tearlaments Sulliek. there's our main deck. For the extra deck, we're on 1 Elder Entity Natis, 1 Tearlaments Kitkallos, 1 Predaplant Dragostapelia, 1 Tearlaments Rulkallos, 1 Tearlaments Kaliedo-Heart, 1 Baronne de Fleur, 1 Abyss Dweller, 1 number 41 Bagooska, the terribly tired Tapir, 1 Time Thief Redoer, 1 Divine Arsenal AA-ZEUS Sky Thunder, 1 IP Masquerena, 1 Aussa the Earth Charmer Immovable, 1 Dark the Dark Charmer Gloomy, 1 Sprite Elf, and then 1 Mech Knight Crusadia Avermax. So, there is our deck. Now let's go and take a look at some gameplay. Our first duel is going to be against Mathmech, and this is just going to be like a sneak preview into really how ridiculous Tearlaments is when it plays against other decks. As you can see, I got the new Madolche field here. The water theme, or the water field might be a bit more on theme, but I of course had to try out the new board here. So, I'm going to start off with Instant Fusion. Instant Fusion is going to be a 1-of Kitkallos, as we all know, or a 1-card Kitkallos, rather. Opponent's going to chain Maxx, but as I mentioned during the deck profile, this is actually completely fine. This deck really can generate some pretty strong board states while only giving your opponent 1 draw. Opponent's going to chain an Ash Blossom on the effect of Kitkallos. That is completely fine. I do not need that at all. I'm just going to activate this Triple Tactics talent next to look at my opponent's hand, see what's going on here. We see their hand. Holy moly, it's 2 Maxx, so they opened all 3 of their Maxx, unless they drew a copy off of it, which would be pretty unlucky. But as well as Microcoder, and then we see Mathmech Circular. So of course I'm going to end up shuffling this back. Between 2 Maxx and the 1 Microcoder, we know they're relying on their top deck in order to be able to have plays here. And then I'll just set Impermanent Pass. Kitkallos is going to get destroyed by Instant Fusion during the end phase, but this is actually completely fine because really all that means that we just get to mill 5. And as you can see, we milled Sulliek as well as 2 of our Tearlament monsters, and most importantly, I think, Mudora. We have a Shuffler in the graveyard, so that's pretty nice. I'm going to use Sulliek to add Havnis here, but I'm actually not going to activate either of my Tearlament effects. I could have potentially summoned the Rulkallos by shuffling back Kitkallos and either Merrli or Havnis, whichever one I decided to proc, but that would also give my opponent another draw. I know their hand is completely dead now, and if they end up having plays, I can just use Havnis to make Rulkallos during their turn, and I have Imperm as well. So, all in all, I'm not particularly worried about, you know, my opponent doing anything here. Although they do actually manage to top deck a Signet Mining, so that's very, very good for them. That's, aside from just straight up Circular, the best card they possibly could have top decked. But that's actually still not going to be enough. Opponent's going to start their plays by Mathmech Circular to send the Sigma, bringing back Sigma, especially the Circular, or rather activating the Circular's effect. I'm going to chain the Havnis. My opponent is going to follow up with their last Maxx, so we know the last card in their hand is just a Microcoder. Well, now it's Microcoder, Equation, and an Unknown. I will activate the Merrli's effect that I triggered here, putting it and the Kitkallos back in order to make the Rulkallos. Now that I'm thinking about it, it might have been fine to just do that last turn anyway, since I knew they had multiple Maxx. I should have figured that I was going to get Maxx on their turn anyway, but it's fine. Either way, it doesn't particularly matter. Opponent's going to activate Alimbershin. I'm going to flip up Imperm. This is the best time to use Imperm during the Mathmech combo is on the Alimbershin, as it'll stop them from getting the diameter. So, alright, they are activating an addition. So, I know their hand is Microcoder, Equation, and 1 Unknown at this point. Going for the Splash Mage. I don't actually need to use Rulkallos' effect here because I have milled not just 1, but both of my Shufflers. So, I'm going to use my Mudora to put back all 3 of their Mathmech monsters, denying them not only their target for Splash Mage, but also lots of meaningful targets for that Equation as well. They're going to link the Splash Mage and the Microcoder into a Transcode Talker next, as you can see here. And getting the Microcoder effect for the Signet Mining. Of course, they already used Signet Mining, so they can't activate it again. Activating the Transcode Talker's effect, I decided to Rulkallos this instead of just using the Shuffler, because I wanted to make sure they didn't have this extra Link 3 on the board. I can also pitch this Sulliek and then end up adding another Tearlaments monster in my hand. Now they've got Equation, they're going to target the Alimbershin. I'll use Keldo now. I probably could have just actually used Keldo in response to the transcode to put that back as well as the Alimbershin. Then I could have maybe saved Rulkallos, but again, I think getting the Link 3 off the board was fine. And there you go, my opponent's out of plays, I can't really do anything else. So that's like a little sneak preview into just how ridiculous Tearlaments are. And that's actually a prime example of how, like, Yes, Maxx, you can still use it against Tearlaments, but you can see how Tearlaments can actually play enough during your turn to run you out of the resources that Maxx then gives you. It's kind of insane, honestly. But yeah, let's go ahead and take a look at our next duel, which will feature even further insanity. Alright, this opponent's going to be on the Vernusil Fashizu Adamantipator, which I actually plan on playing here soon as well. And this game is going to be a short one. We're going second, and this game is purely to showcase like how this deck can play during your opponent's turn. As you can see, we opened an Imperm, which is an expected piece of disruption to play on the opponent's turn. But we also opened Tearlaments Havnis. Havnis is probably the best, not even probably, it's just the best card to open if you're going second, because basically, like I said, it'll allow you to play during your opponent's turn. This is going to be some quote-unquote turn 0 action, where we're not even going to get to our first turn before we're starting to fill our board and interrupt our opponent. So, opponent's going to start by normal summoning a Quackhammer Guardian. They're then going to pitch the new Vernusil of the Flourishing, there we go, Flourishing Hills, using that to add the Vernusil of the Awakening Forest. This is the one that allows them to Foolish an Earth Monster, so presumably they want to use this in order to get a, a Block Dragon in their graveyard. But they also get to not only, pitch to add, but they also get to summon the Tackle Crusader they went ahead and sent from their hand to the graveyard as well. Looks like they're, of course, going into Gallant Granite in order to search up the Block Dragon. As soon as it activates the effect, I'm going to want to go ahead and use the Havnis effect in response. And then we can also throw out the Imperm to make sure that gets negated and they can't search up their Block Dragon. Alright, so Imperm, yep, as I said, we're negating Gallant Granite with that. Here comes Havnis. Havnis is going to mill 3 cards off the top of our deck. Didn't actually mill a Tearlament monster, but it did mill a Fairy Tale Snow and a Keldo. Most importantly, the Keldo. So we're not actually going to get to fuse necessarily here, but it's fine. My opponent's going to Foolish Burial and send an Agido, and then they actually activate the Agido's effect. This was a massive misplay on my opponent's part, in my opinion. Now, to be fair, they can't just straight up Foolish the Block Dragon, and they know that because I have the Keldo in my graveyard. I can just shuffle the Block Dragon back. So, I mean, I get that they had to do something, but at the same time, proccing this card against Tearlaments, if you don't absolutely need to, I don't know, you can even make an argument that my opponent had to here, though. But in any case, it's typically not a good idea, and we're about to see why. Opponent's going to proc the Agido effect, milling 5 from each of us. My opponent milled... I mean, especially as the Adamantipator player, like, unless you're milling straight up Block Dragon, you're never going to mill anything super significant, right? So my opponent mills a bunch of random assorted stuff. I milled an Agido as well as a Havnis. Now, we used the summon effect of Havnis earlier, but we actually haven't used the second effect, so we can proc that here. I'm going to proc the Agido too, because I definitely want to mill more. I don't care if my opponent has access to Block Dragon. I know I can stop that. Now, my opponent did mill a Keldo here, which is a little bit awkward for me, but they can't, use it mid-chain link, so there's at least that. And then by follow-up mills were not super great, but that's fine. I'm still just going to go ahead and summon my Kitkallos here. But it's going to use Tackle Crusader to flip Kitkallos face down, which is totally fine, but it doesn't actually do anything. I'm then going to get the Sulliek effect as well as the Kitkallos effect. I'll use Sulliek to just grab Reinoheart here, just to have it. It's not really needed. And then I'm going to use Kitkallos to send a Scheiren from the deck to the graveyard. I decided to send a Scheiren because I already had a Scheiren in hand, and if I wanted to proc another Tearlament effects by milling, then Merrli would be the most likely one to want to proc there. So yeah, I'm going to fuse with the Scheiren here. Again, putting a monster face down does not actually prevent you from fusing with it, so the Tackle Crusader did not accomplish much there. And now I can just summon a Rulkallos. And then at that point, my opponent's going to concede. And this is, again, just a sneak preview as to how ridiculously this deck can play. As you can see, mostly thanks to my opponent's Agido, honestly, we're able to play so much that we Kitkallos and then fuse into Rulkallos during our opponent's turn 1, as well as having a Keldo live in the graveyard. Now, our opponent did 2, but at the same time, they only had 2 cards in hand, the Dead Gallant Granite on board. They can't search up Block Dragon without me shuffling it back into the deck. They're just done. And again, I haven't even started my first turn yet. Oops, sorry, bumped the desk there. And as you can see, we're already just winning the duel and summoning multiple fusion monsters. It's insane. This deck is insanity. So that's a little preview of how insane Tearlaments is against other decks. Now let's look at some mirror matches. Alright, so this is going to be, as I mentioned, a Tearlaments mirror match. Now, my opponent is, of course, on a bunch of different tech. They're on King of the Swamp, not a terrible idea. They're playing a Polymerization, which I don't really understand. They're also playing Winter Cherries. I have been asked about Winter Cherries before, and I gotta say, I don't think the card is good. I just don't. I think it's pretty bad. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really have anything else to say about it, honestly. I just think Winter Cherries is not that great of a card to play. So, I want to start with Keldo here, pitching Mudora. A couple of reasons I want to do this. One, I want to make sure I get a Shuffler into my graveyard here. And two, on top of that, I also actually want to try to summon a Abyss Dweller as early as possible. That tends to be, for the most part, what you just want to do. But of course, the fact that my opponent Maxx is going to kind of throw off my plans here, so normally I would grab Reinoheart to start making my plays, but I'm just going to grab Havnis and then play the Scream and then pass over to my opponent here. I have Maxx, Havnis, and Kelbek in hand, so I have a lot of things to do on their turn. I'm going to Maxx during their draw phase to play around a potential triple tactics talent. My opponent passes without playing anything. I don't think that's right, especially going second. Although it might be that between Maxx and also the fact that I had two Shufflers, that might have actually been the right call. Maybe they just weren't able to really do anything at all. But in any case, my turn now. I'm going to normal summon this Havnis to proc the Scream. Thankfully milled a bunch of Tearlaments cards, actually. I'm going to proc the Merrli and the Sulliek, but not the Scheiren. Here comes my opponent's Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries. So they do actually get to banish the Kitkallos from my extra deck, which will turn off this fusion. But honestly, I don't know. Like, yeah, my opponent got this off, but I'm not going to lie, I still don't think it's that great. Like, it's just, I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain my exact position here, but the reason I don't tend to think Winter Cherries is that great is that it's situational, both when, you know, what decks can play it, which you need your extra deck to play it, and what decks you can use it against. And on top of that, it's not backbreaking enough by itself. Like, yeah, you can banish Kitkallos like my opponent did here, and yeah, that's definitely not bad. Like, that definitely limits my options, but not so much that it stops me from playing. It's just gonna, like, make my board state a little bit weird, so. I am actually going to proc the Kelbek here, even though I know it's the mirror match, and I don't have an Abyss Dweller rep, because I do have, at the very least, a couple of Shufflers here, so. Opponent milled a Kelbek themselves, so they're going to end up milling as well. I'm going to use the Mudora to stop them from proccing their Havnis, as well as putting back a couple of their other things, and then, of course, they're going to use their Mudora to stop my things from proccing as well, including attempting to do so on my Fairy Tale Snow. But we're just going to chain that in response, and this is just, you know, you've seen the memes about how ridiculous the Tearlaments chain links can get. Well, this is just, again, a preview of that. So, yeah, ultimately, the decision to mill my opponent for 5 here, I think was fine. Because even though I don't get to fuse because they milled a Shuffler, I still end up with more on my board than I would have had otherwise. Opponent did mill a couple more effects here, but I still have this Keldo on my field, so I'll just use that in order to make sure that they are not able to summon anything. Now they get to Kelbek here in order to put back my Fairy Tale Snow, which looks pretty bad. But actually, because I searched Tearlaments Cryme and I just send a monster from my hand to the graveyard anyway, that's completely fine. I'm 100% okay with my opponent doing that. So yeah, I'm just going to move to battle phase, smack with my Tearlament monsters on board, set a couple of cards and pass. It's funny how, like, after you go after this huge back and forth with your opponent, you just end up with, like, the basic Tearlament monsters in play. Oh, by the way, this Scream is when either player summons while you control a Tearlament monster, so the card's actually insane. We didn't mill anything good here, but still. I'm not going to negate the Reinoheart with the Imperm. I was going to wait to see if they managed to get out Kitkallos. I will negate the Merrli with the Cryme, however, mostly just to get my Fairy Tale Snow in the yard. But, yeah, my opponent's not going to have any more follow-up. They're just going to set 2 and then pass. I will bring back Snow during their end phase, just in case, you know, one of their face-down cards ends up being Cryme. I don't want to walk into that. And then, yeah, now here I can just normal summon the Agido. I'll mill 3 off a Scream just to see what I hit. I did hit an Agido, but there's no reason to mill my opponent here to give them plays. I'm just going to enter the battle phase and smack my opponent for lethal. So yeah, that's kind of how the mirror match can come down to a lot of the time, is just like, at the end of you and your opponent having you know, gone through this huge epic chain link, you're not going to have much on board, but the idea is that your opponent's ideally not going to have that many resources either. As far as I can tell so far, gotta put a huge asterisk on that because I'm still very new to playing this deck in general, and of course the mirror match, and like I said, this is definitely one of the more skill-intensive matchups here. Not just of this meta, but of any meta in general, I think. So, we do have one more duel to take a look at, another mirror match. Let's go straight into it. Alright, like I said, our last duel here is going to be against another mirror match. The opponent is on the Salvation engine, as well as the Mask Change 2 package. Excuse me. Which is really just 2 Mask Change 2 and Dark Law, but... anyway, we're going to take the first turn here. I'm actually going to start with the Scheiren in order to basically get my Keldo in the graveyard. You'll notice that I tend to prioritize getting a Shuffler in the yard and or summoning the Abyss Dweller. I tend to prioritize that very highly. Now, with the Scheiren, we milled Scream as well as the Agido. But in this case, I'm actually not going to proc the Agido because I don't need to. I already have Instant Fusion and Foolish Burial Goods in my hand. And also my opponent has already put me under Maxx, so I'm probably not going to be summoning much this turn anyway. And I definitely don't want to set up my opponent's graveyard, that's for sure. So, going to use Foolish Burial Goods to send, of course, the Sulliek, and I'll use that to add the Havnis here. I'll then set Cryme and pass. I actually should have maybe thought about Instant Fusioning for the Kitkallos here, but I'm actually going to think about that right now for a second. Would that have actually done anything? I don't think it really does. Like, I could have added a Sulliek and set it. That might have actually not been the worst, although against the mirror match, it's not really necessarily the most impactful card. I don't know. There is the argument, though, that I can still negate my... Like, yeah, I get a monster negate, but then I also give my opponent a draw, so it's kind of like, you know. Opponent's going to start the Scheiren of their own. They're going to send a Reinoheart and mill a bunch of irrelevant cards. Trying to activate the Reinoheart's effect. I'm actually going to use the Keldo now on the Reinoheart, although, looking back, I think maybe I should just use the Tearlaments Cryme here. Like, the Keldo has the opportunity to hit multiple stuff, so I think I maybe should have waited for a good chance to do that. To be fair, though, it does stop my opponent's plays. They're going to have to move to battle phase and run over my Scheiren before passing. I wonder if it's right to actually... You know, I usually summon stuff in defense mode on turn 1, but I wonder if it was actually right to play Scheiren in attack mode here for kind of this exact reason. So, opponent's got another Maxx. I'm going to Kelbek and then bounce their Scheiren back to their hand before normal summoning my Reinoheart here. Opponent does get to chain their Havnis, but I'm going to just chain my Tearlaments Cryme in order to negate that. Now, this is awkward because I'm under Maxx, but I don't really think I have the ability to OTK here. I think also sending the other Havnis might have been a bit of a mistake on the Reinoheart here. Here's the other thing where I think I kind of misplayed here, is actually summoning this Kitkallos. Because I have Instant Fusion in hand, that's actually going to make this Instant Fusion dead. I could have also maybe summoned Kaliedo-Heart. I just don't see summoning Kaliedo-Heart being right. Well, I don't know, though. I actually definitely should have summoned Kaliedo-Heart. Wait, what am I talking about? I have this other Havnis in my graveyard. I thought I didn't have another Tearlament in my graveyard, but I was wrong. I had the second Havnis that I sent off Reinoheart. So, yeah, that was a huge misplay on my part, actually. I absolutely should have summoned Kaliedo-Heart and then Instant Fusion for Kitkallos. Yeah, main phase 2, I'm going to move into this Dweller to try and maybe stop my opponent from doing stuff during their turn, but I'm too far behind on advantage at this point. That last turn in general was really awkward because of the Maxx, and then... Yeah, I think I made a couple of misplays there. I mean, I assuredly am making misplays just due to how complex the deck is, but a couple that I spotted there was, I think, trying to play under Maxx at all. Trying to find lethal under Maxx, I think, might have been ultimately the mistake that I made there. But definitely not fusing for Kaliedo-Heart. Leaving this Instant Fusion dead in my hand, I think, was also a misplay. Opponent's going for Time Thief Redoer. That way they can detach the Scheiren during my turn. And because Redoer actually detaches as a effect and not part of the cost, they get to proc the Scheiren's effect, which will then allow them to go into Kitkallos, and then now they just get to play. Now they just get to play during my turn. What we were doing to that Adamantipator player, my opponent is now going to do to me. And top decking the planet is a good top deck, but it's honestly not going to be enough for lethal. So I'm going to fast forward just a little bit as my opponent's just going to drop a Rulkallos on me, and then I'm going to ultimately end up conceding after that. I guess I'll activate the planet first, and Yeah, well, really it was the Havnis in response that really made me be like, yeah, there's just no chance, right? There's no chance I'm playing out of this. They have the Mudora, they have the Shuffler as well, so... Yeah, at this point, even though my opponent doesn't have, like, lethal on board, I know they're going to have it next turn, so I'm just going to concede here. So, as you can see, there's a lot of room to make mistakes in the mirror match, and I definitely made a couple during that game. But, you know, that's, you know, the objective of the channel as a whole. We're all here to learn, and we're definitely going to be doing lots of learning with this deck here coming up. So definitely stay tuned. Even if you're not playing Tearlaments yourself, it's definitely... you know, I would say crucial, if not mandatory, to know how to play against the deck, for sure. So, yeah, that's going to go ahead and do it for our games. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Now let's go ahead and move on to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There, for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack, you'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation. You do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now. So without further ado, this is Maxx. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.